Achieve more to feel less stressed. Unlike other productivity books, Newport Slow Productivity doesn't push hustle, but suggests the opposite. Slow down to achieve more meaningful work, which is something I'd want, so to get there I wanted to read the book. And to avoid the productivity porn trap of reading without taking action, I've been implementing all his methods since I read the book earlier this year. In this video I'll share how I tested Newport's 3 principles and a dozen different tips to find out which ones actually increase productivity. But measuring productivity in modern knowledge work isn't straightforward. More time or more effort doesn't necessarily mean better results. For example, you could spend hours crafting one very important email, or spend a few minutes crafting 20 trivial ones. Who was more productive? While Newport recognizes the complexity, he doesn't provide a direct solution, and cleverly phrases his claim as pursuing meaningful accomplishment while avoiding overload. So to challenge his principles, I would have to measure if I feel more accomplished and if I feel less stressed, leaving me with 3 vague metrics to track. How much did it reduce my stress? How much more accomplished do I feel? And how easy is it to implement? So get your note apps ready, because you'll want to try some of these tips yourself. The first step to do fewer things is to cut down your project list and to focus on fewer, higher priority ones. I started the year with 26 projects and cut them down to 17. And I didn't abandon the projects, but admitted that some of them were just not that high of a priority. For example, while I'd like to get an MBA, learn JavaScript and become fluent in Spanish, I decided to just choose one project for the year, which made working on the remaining one less stressful, and with the added attention and focus, I made significant progress. Letting go of postponing this many projects certainly isn't easy, especially in a professional context where I was not in control of the projects I have to work on. Still, the core advice is very powerful. Focus on your most important projects and give them your full attention. To reduce your project list, you should also learn how to say no, to set boundaries and avoid more projects. I used to take on every project that came my way because FOMO, which led me to the overwhelming amount of 26 active projects. Now with a clear project list, I know when to say no and avoid projects that don't fit with my main goals. And saying no has the same impact as reducing the projects. It creates more breathing room for the projects and things that are most important. And saying no isn't always easy. It requires discipline and tact, especially when you are saying no to your boss or to clients. I do recommend this approach even if it is challenging at first. Learning to say no frees up so much time and mental space that you can dedicate to your highest impact projects. And a useful way to say no tactfully is to properly plan and communicate your task load. This means mapping out tasks for each project and estimating your workloads, which gives you a clearer picture of your commitments and deadlines. While this process highlighted which projects require most time and effort, it didn't significantly decrease my stress. It just reminded me of everything I still had to do. Planning this thoroughly didn't add any meaning or sense of accomplishment to my work either. And realistically, this level of detail is difficult to maintain with every project. And I am already one of those crazy people who uses project management tools in their private life, which you might find excessive, but if you're not managing your relationship and dating life on Notion, you're missing out. So unless you thrive on detailed planning, I'd recommend skipping this approach. It's time-consuming to implement, and for most people, basic task tracking is probably enough. The principle of doing fewer things is powerful. By reducing my project list and saying no to new projects, I significantly decreased my stress and actually found more meaning and sense of accomplishment with my remaining work. And it was also surprisingly manageable and easy to implement. By narrowing your focus, you naturally reduce output. But that's the point, to focus on what truly matters and thus feeling more accomplished. If there's one takeaway in this video, it's this: start cutting down your project list. The first tip to start working at a natural pace is to expand your goals to a 5-year timeline, allowing for slower seasons and setbacks. This approach eases the pressure of achieving everything at once and makes ambitious goals feel more achievable. For example, becoming fluent in Spanish in 1 year was just overwhelming. but spreading it over several years made it much more realistic. While at first it made me feel less productive, over time I felt that I was more motivated to actually work on this life goal and even made more progress. Plus, it's super easy to implement. Just make your 5-year plan the same way you would make a 1-year plan. I highly recommend this. If you're aiming for sustainable progress, this is a great way to structure your life goals. Newport also suggests doubling your project timeline to alleviate stress and avoid the rush of unrealistic deadlines, which is similar advice as before, just on a smaller, more tangible scale. To me, doubling the project timeline is the same as having the amount of projects. It obviously creates more breathing room and allows me to focus on what remains. So if you're unable to reduce the number of projects, this is an interesting alternative. By increasing the timeline, you also create more breathing room to focus on what's important. Another tip Newport gives is to reduce the number of tasks you take on each day, allowing for a more realistic workload without feeling overwhelmed. For me, reducing my daily task count was a huge stress reliever, and surprisingly, it didn't decrease my output. I just carried fewer tasks over to the next day, making me feel more accomplished instead of behind. And implementing it was super easy. I just focused on setting an achievable amount every morning. I highly recommend this approach. Finishing all my daily tasks early gave me more room to work on other priorities without stress, which makes this one of the most effective strategies to improve productivity and mental clarity. You should also reduce the number of meetings to free up more hours for focused work. Well, cutting meetings at work wasn't really an option for me since most of them are mandatory. I did rethink my personal scheduling. I did free up a lot of time by combining my social activities with productive ones, like meeting friends at the gym or even having dates there. It might sound efficient to a fault, but my friends actually appreciated it. Germans might also be the right target audience for these kinds of ideas. Wherever I could have less meetings, it did reduce stress and increase productivity, although it is really tough to apply universally. In theory, reducing meetings is a great tip, but it's hard to execute, especially in a work setting where you're not in control. Newport also suggests balancing big projects with intentional rest periods, so scheduling slow seasons during times such as summer or holidays to avoid burnout and to allow for recovery. While the off-season itself did reduce stress, planning these periods around work and other responsibilities actually kinda increased it. I also felt like I was getting a lot less done, unless you want to count my downtime as an accomplishment. While it was manageable to implement, I didn't really find it beneficial. This wasn't the best tip for me. I already take holidays, and planning more off-seasons just didn't really vibe with how I work. But it might work very well for you depending on your work setting. But I didn't find it impactful enough to recommend broadly. For principle 2, work at a natural pace, I found that most of the advice, like make a long-term plan or reduce the amount of tasks or meetings in a day, while useful, is just a repackaging of do fewer things. And the other tips I found less impactful and more work than they're worth. Newport's third and final principle, obsess over quality instead of mindlessly finishing tasks, helps create work that feels meaningful. And enhancing your taste is the first step towards recognizing and reaching higher quality. This advice didn't reduce my stress. It actually increased it as I realized how much I still have to learn. But I felt significantly more accomplished because I started producing good work that I was proud of. And implementing this advice is fairly easy, thanks to all the online resources on pretty much any topic. So despite the initial stress of actually having to learn something, I highly recommend doing it because of how much more fulfilled you feel with your work. Refining your taste makes you more critical of your output, which ultimately inspires real growth and pride in what you do. You should also find a community to connect with like-minded professionals who are equally committed to growth. A supportive community should challenge you, encourage your progress, and keep you motivated. I found joining a community quite stressful because of the time commitment, but it did greatly improve my sense of accomplishment, as sharing my work and learning from others is incredibly rewarding. However, finding the right community is incredibly challenging and requires a lot of effort to locate and engage with the right kind of people. And I couldn't find good communities for most of my goals. While it is challenging to find the right community, I can still recommend it. If you're unable to find a suitable group, I think it's okay to skip this advice and avoid forcing it. So go look for local or online groups, and if you find one that clicks, go for it. You should also invest in the right tools to enhance your skills and elevate the quality of your work. For a long time, I was holding myself back because I was afraid of wasting money. But once I started investing in tools like ChatGPT 4, I immediately felt a reduction in stress and actually felt like I was progressing more quickly and with better quality. But finding the right tools can be quite expensive and time-consuming. I highly recommend putting in the effort to find the right tools that make sense in your current situation. Not only does it really enhance your workflow and your productivity, but it also adds a gamification aspect that at least really clicked with me. Another tip for quality work is to focus on progress, not perfection. So set achievable goals with meaningful stakes, like a Pokemon trainer going from gym to gym until becoming champion. Over time, steady progress leads to mastery. This approach had a massive impact on my stress levels, as it alleviated the pressure that comes from being overly goal-oriented and often overwhelmed. It also positively influenced my sense of accomplishment, as I started to celebrate smaller improvements along the way. Plus, implementing this advice is incredibly easy since it's fundamentally just a mindset shift. So I highly recommend focusing on progression instead of perfection. This perspective not only reduces stress, but it also keeps you motivated on your journey to mastery. Finally, Newport encourages you to invest your time, commitment, and money into your project. He emphasizes that significant investments are often necessary to achieve meaningful outcomes. Surprisingly, implementing this made me feel more at ease, because I combined it with reducing projects. Having too many projects often felt like a burden to me. So I asked myself, am I willing to spend money on this? Am I willing to spend 5 hours a week on this project? So all the remaining 17 projects are ones where I'm willing to spend time and money on today. The focus and commitment to the remaining projects decreases uncertainty and stress and increases output. While on paper this seems fairly easy to implement, it is emotionally challenging to decide which projects deserve all your resources. But I highly recommend doing it. Putting time and money where your mouth is really helps solidify the commitment to your projects. This bet on yourself will help you make your biggest leap forward. Overall, Principle 3, Obsess over Quality, offers some more excellent advice. While Newport doesn't explicitly address it, the focus on skill improvement meets the fundamental psychological need for competence. Coupled with fewer tasks and a greater control over my schedule, it fosters a sense of autonomy, which gives us two key elements of fulfillment that enhance the effectiveness of these principles. By honing your skills and obsessing over quality, you not only find more meaning in your work, but also become proficient in your craft, setting you up for long-term success. At first glance, I wasn't a fan of Cal Newport's Slow Productivity. The subtitle implies this is a lost art, a common self-help trope that frames modern advice as a rediscovery of forgotten wisdom, but Newport himself doesn't even address it in the book. While we might not have had burnouts back in the day, we also didn't get shit done for 1,000 years. And the content of the book isn't really groundbreaking either. While Slow Productivity promises reduced stress and increased meaningful output, most of the book is just do less and do it well. But the value of focusing on what's truly important is undeniable. While I'd love to dunk on Cal Newport for stretching basic advice over hundreds of pages, it took this book for me to finally apply it. While you can find tips like these all over the internet, in this book with the detailed explanations, the examples, and the action steps, it was really easy to finally implement the processes that I already knew were necessary. By the end of this experiment, I definitely felt less stressed and brought some clarity to my projects. While applying these principles didn't make me more productive, it also didn't make me less productive. Ultimately, slow productivity isn't about getting more done in a day. It's about making each accomplishment more meaningful.